So today we're diving into the story of one of the most brilliant and, yeah, one of the most tragic figures of the 20th century, Bobby Fischer. This was a man who was a living, breathing paradox, and to really get the legend, you have to first understand the man. I mean, on the one hand, you have this absolute chess god, a global icon, who, all by himself, shattered the Soviet Union's total grip on the game. But on the other hand, he ended his life as a U.S. fugitive, an exile who was just reviled. And that, right there, is the core of his story. It all boils down to this one huge question, right? How did this prodigy, this kid who was the very symbol of American genius and individualism, end up stateless, wanted by the same country that had once hailed him as a hero? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the very beginning. And, Fischer's beginnings, they were way more complicated than most people ever knew, rooted in a family history that was basically shrouded in secrets. Okay, so the first piece of this puzzle is his own father. His birth certificate names a German biophysicist, Hans Gerhard Fischer. But here's the thing. Declassified FBI files later proved that was impossible. Turns out, his biological father was a man named Paul Nemeni, a brilliant Hungarian Jewish physicist who, just like Bobby, was a child prodigy. And get this, Nemeni secretly paid to support Bobby throughout his entire childhood. From the second his sister taught him how to play at age 6, that was it. Game over. His focus became totally and completely absolute. And this one quote from him as a kid, it says it all. All I want to do, ever, is play chess. Nothing else even registered. And by the time he was just 13 years old, he plays what is still called the game of the century. I mean, just look at move 17 on the board, a stunning, beautiful queen sacrifice. He saw things, combinations that seasoned grandmasters completely missed. It was like a thunderclap, announcing that something new and frankly terrifying had arrived on the scene. So this incredible talent was on a collision course with history. By 1972, Fischer wasn't just playing for a title anymore. No, this was a geopolitical showdown. He was basically a lone American gladiator taking on the entire Soviet chess machine, right at the absolute peak of the Cold War. And when I say dominance, I mean, it was just off the charts. On his way to that championship match, he won 20 consecutive games against the world's absolute best. This wasn't a hot streak, you guys. This was an act of total annihilation that was completely unheard of at that level. To really get how insane this is, he didn't just beat elite guys like Mark Taimanov and Bent Larsen. He shut them out completely. 6-0. Then he did it again. 6-0. In the chess world, that's like a boxer winning 2 back-to-back fights by first-round knockout. It just doesn't happen. So all of this whole incredible, destructive run, it all leads to the big one, the 1972 match against Boris Spassky in Reykjavik, Iceland. After all the drama, all the psychological warfare, Fischer wins. He becomes the first American-born world chess champion and overnight a national hero. But right then, at the absolute pinnacle of his success, the story just takes a nosedive. The champion of the world, he just vanished. He was the most famous chess player on Earth. We're talking millions of dollars in sponsorships and offers pouring in. And he just said no to all of it. This wasn't about the money. This was a total rejection of the very world that was trying to embrace him. So what happened to all his winnings? Well, a huge chunk of it went to an apocalyptic cult called the Worldwide Church of God. Fischer got deeply involved with them, but he was absolutely shattered when their big prophecy that the world would end in 1975 didn't happen. It just left him feeling betrayed and incredibly bitter. And that disillusionment happened right as he was supposed to defend his title. So he comes up with this whole list of non-negotiable demands. But one of them was a real deal breaker, the 9-9 tie clause. What that meant was if the match was a tie, he would automatically keep the title. The challenger had to beat him by at least 2 games. It was a massive, totally unfair advantage. When the International Chess Federation refused that one single clause, Fischer just refused to play. And just like that, on April 3rd, 1975, he forfeited the title he had spent his entire life fighting for. He wouldn't play a serious game of chess again for 20 years. So, for the next 2 decades, Fischer is a ghost. But here's the crazy part. Even in the shadows, his mind was still working, still innovating for the game he loved, even as his own life was just spiraling into total isolation and conflict. He comes up with this thing called Fischer random, or chess 960. The idea is brilliant, really. You randomize the starting position of the major pieces. It makes memorizing openings totally useless. It was his way of forcing the game back to pure creativity, not just who had a better memory. It's a fantastic idea, and it's still played today. Then, in 1992, he finally comes out of hiding for a rematch against Spassky. The problem? It was in Yugoslavia, which was under strict U.S. sanctions. At the press conference, he holds up the official warning letter from the U.S. Treasury, and he spits on it. On camera. For the whole world to see. And that one act sealed his fate. A warrant goes out for his arrest. He spends the next 12 years living as a fugitive, moving between countries until he's finally detained in Japan in 2004. He was literally a man without a country until Iceland, the site of his greatest triumph, stepped in and granted him citizenship in 2005.
So, he ends up in Iceland, the place where he became a king. He lived out his final years there, but the drama, it was far from over. It would follow him right to the grave and beyond.
He passed away from kidney failure in 2008. He was 64, one square for every year of his life. And his last words, they're just, wow. Nothing is as healing as the human touch. Pretty heartbreaking, coming from a man who spent almost his entire life pushing people away. And, of course, even his death wasn't peaceful. It immediately kicked off this messy, frankly ugly, fight over his $2 million estate. You had claims from his longtime Japanese companion, Miyoko Watai, his nephews from the U.S., and a woman who claimed her daughter, Jinky, was Fischer's secret child. It got so bad they actually had to exhume his body for a DNA test. So, after all that drama, the DNA test comes back. It proved Jinky Young was not his daughter. And in the end, the Icelandic courts sided with Miyoko Watai, ruling she was his legal wife and the heir to everything. The chaotic final chapter was finally closed. Which leaves us right back where we started with this impossible question. Bobby Fischer's genius was transcendent. He played chess with a ferocity and a beauty that changed the game forever. But his personal life was just filled with paranoia and hate. So how do we remember him? Can you separate the sublime art from the deeply flawed artist? Or should you even try?